Okay, trying to get your head around complex global events right now.
Yeah.
It can feel like you're staring at 100 different news feeds at once.
Right. Just trying to piece together a coherent picture from all these different angles, military tactics, investigations, personal stories.
It's a lot.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the challenge isn't just finding the info, it's making sense of, well, the sheer volume and how different it all is. You've got official doctrines, these really detailed operational procedures.
And then the raw accounts from the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's really why we're doing this deep dive. We've pulled together a stack of your sources. I mean, everything from like dry military manuals and these in-depth conflict reports.
Just to threat assessments that hit closer to home and even, glimpses from social media.
So our mission here is to try and cut through some of that noise.
Yeah, pull out the most important insights from all this material, diverse as it is, and connect the dots. See how these seemingly separate things actually link up.
The goal is to give you a clearer, maybe more complete picture of conflict, strategy, and their real-world impact.
Without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Exactly. Let's unpack this.
Okay.
So we're going to start surprisingly granular, I think. We're down at the tactical level. How do forces actually operate on the ground once they've secured a location? We're using a military manual on something called site exploitation as our guide here.
Right. Site exploitation.
What is that exactly?
So at its core, it's the systematic process of collecting, information, physical items, material, they call it, and people from a specific location of interest.
Okay.
But what's really interesting, or what the source emphasizes, is that it's not some cleanup operation after the fact.
Wow.
It's integrated into the military decision-making process right from the start, from when they receive the mission. It's basically intelligence gathering baked into the tactical op.
So it's planned way ahead. And the level of detail involved, I mean, even the equipment list in the manual is pretty striking.
Oh, yeah. We're talking tactical kits, sure, backpacks and things.
But also tweezers, flex cuffs, labels.
Explosive detection kits, fingerprinting items. It's quite the list.
That almost forensic level of detail, it suggests they're treating these sites less like just a battlefield and more like...
Like potential crime scenes.
Oh.
Or intelligence gold mines, maybe.
Yeah.
And the process described is very structured. There's an initial walkthrough by trained people, establishing entry points, organizing the search phone, maybe numbering rooms in a building.
And documentation. Loads of documentation.
Meticulous is the word the manual uses. Photographing everything.
Like before anything's touched.
Exactly. Before exploitation, shots from all cardinal directions, any people on site, items in place exactly where they were found.
Wow.
And then close-ups of items, often with rulers or ID documents for scale.
Plus field notebooks, photo logs linked to sketches, even video sometimes.
Right. It's all about creating this really complete, verifiable record. They stress multiple angles, close-ups, showing the scale.
And why all this effort? I mean, beyond just cataloging.
Well, that documented evidence is crucial because the items collected the material are evaluated based on their context. What do they mean here?
Okay.
There might be some initial analysis right there on site, maybe presumptive testing if it's something really time-sensitive for intelligence.
But the real deep dive happens later.
Exactly. Everything gets carefully described, packaged, tagged, and then shipped off to specialized facilities, like a captured material exploitation center, they call it, for much deeper technical analysis.
Are there specific procedures for different kinds of items? Does the manual get into that?
Oh, absolutely. Weapons, for instance. They're not just grabbed.
Right.
Their position, any markings, all photographed. Then they're rendered safe. Ammunition is packaged separately. They even have procedures for marking weapons they can't make safe on the spot.
And electronics. Phones, computers.
Same deal. Carefully packaged for off-site forensic analysis. Nothing's powered on usually.
And you mentioned even the ground itself.
Yeah.
Soil.
Yeah, it's in there. Soil classification distinguishing silt from clay based on how sticky it is or the grain size. Seems incredibly detailed.
Wow, down to the dirt. Okay, what about people found at these sites? Persons of interest.
They're handled carefully too. There's tactical questioning right there, on site.
Who does that?
Often specially trained human intelligence collectors, sometimes using interpreters. The idea is to maybe get information that helps refine the search right then and there.
What kind of questions?
The source mentions using simple, direct questions, sometimes rehearsing them first, and aiming for exact translations, ideally recorded.
And if someone seems particularly important, A high-value individual.
They're typically handed over to specialized human intelligence teams for more in-depth handling.
And all of this feeds back into the ongoing operation. It's not just for later analysis.
Definitely.
And
Gathering this info directly supports threat mitigation. Intelligence from the site can lead to immediate threat warnings for other units.
right.
And the whole process involves risk management, identifying and controlling risks.
Tactical risks like booby traps, IEDs, snipers.
Exactly. But also accidental risks like, are there civilians nearby? Is visibility poor? Things that affect safety.
So that initial analysis, the presumptive testing you mentioned, that provides the really quick turnaround intelligence.
That's the idea. Time-sensitive stuff gets pushed out fast. Situation reports, maybe direct messages to higher headquarters.
And the deeper analysis from the labs.
That gets disseminated more widely later on, including, importantly, back to the unit that actually collected the stuff in the first place, so they learn too.
And this off-site analysis, it supports all sorts of follow-on activities.
Right. Military operations, sure, but also potentially law enforcement, forensic analysis, maybe even host nation authorities, depending on the situation.
And eventually the site itself is, what, handed over?
Yeah, the manual talks about a planned transfer of control. Once the processing of material and persons is done, it might be handed over to another security force or maybe a host nation authority.
Who decides that?
Commanders assess the situation. They consider things like, is the site safe? What's the operational tempo? Are there ongoing threats? Even potential monetary reparations for damage might be a factor.
And the items that people collected.
They move through initial collection points and then on to the proper facilities, exploitation centers, detainee collection points, and so on.
It's just striking how this source lays out such a clinical, almost scientific method.
It really is. The emphasis on being systematic, on documentation, preservation, treating a potentially chaotic scene like a laboratory.
It really shows how intelligence gathering is just deeply woven into every physical step of modern operations.
It does, and it raises a really important question, I think. How does this highly controlled, very detailed process described in the manual actually work in the messy, fast-moving reality of conflict?
Especially when civilians are involved.
Exactly.
That's a perfect segue, actually. Let's shift gears now from that tactical ground-level view to the higher-level strategic thinking that might be guiding some of these operations. We've got a document here discussing Israel's national security doctrine.
Right. This source outlines the traditional core concepts of that doctrine. Things like preventing war if possible, ensuring good intelligence warning, and if war comes, achieving a fast, decisive victory.
And it notes this doctrine wasn't always like one single written document.
Correct. It was often embedded in various policies, military directives, speeches, and so on. More of a living concept.
But it's clearly been evolving, hasn't it? The source points to a shift.
Yes, a significant shift mentioned is away from large-scale ground maneuvers.
The big tank battles of the past.
Sort of, yeah. Towards more precise standoff fire missiles, air power combined with limited ground maneuvers.
Why the change? What does the source say?
Several reasons are cited. One is reducing casualties, force attrition. Another is a growing need to factor in political considerations before committing to major ground operations.
And technology plays a role.
A huge role. Technology enables that precision fire, obviously. But the document also mentions the parallel development of defensive capabilities, like missile defense.
What about preemptive action? Is that still part of the doctrine?
The source says yes, preemptive or preventative strikes remain a potential component,
But
it stresses that political factors now carry significant weight alongside the purely military advantages when they're considering such options. It's not just about military necessity anymore.
the document also emphasizes jointness. What's that about?
That's the need for really comprehensive cooperation and integration across different organizations, not just within the military branches, but between military and non-military bodies, too.
To deal with modern threats effectively.
Exactly, to create a systemic ability to handle complex challenges and leverage all national advantages.
And how they build up the military is changing too.
Right. The source suggests a shift away from building forces specifically designed to counter one particular known enemy or threat, towards building more generic, flexible capabilities. This is apparently a response to increased uncertainty about future threats and the rapidly changing nature of conflict itself.
Now, a really key point the source highlights is the stated importance of adhering to moral and legal systems.
Absolutely. The document is quite explicit about this. It talks about the need for strict observance of the appropriate context, the right proportion, and subordination to moral and legal frameworks.
Especially in certain situations.
Particularly when operating in complex asymmetric conflicts, think counterinsurgency or fighting non-state actors, and especially when operating amongst civilian populations.
And why is this seen as important, just for international image?
The source frames it as essential, not just for external policy, legitimacy, and international standing, but also crucially for Israel's own internal strength and societal resilience.
Interesting. There's also mention of being more proactive beyond just military stuff.
Yes, the doctrine apparently identifies a growing need for proactive initiatives. Ways to shape the strategic reality and advance national goals using non-military leverage more often than in the past.
But still combined with military power.
Combined wisely is the phrasing, I believe. Thoughtfully integrated.
Cooperation with other countries is also stressed.
Increasingly vital, the source says. Cooperation with key international partners, with regional players, especially those Israel has peace treaties with, and other moderate states, particularly to counter shared threats.
And one more thing. The cyber dimension.
Ah, yes. Highlighted as having revolutionary potential, a key factor across the board deterrence, defense, and offense.
So, if you step back and look at the big picture here.
What you see is a doctrine trying to adapt, trying to balance traditional military objectives with these very modern, complex challenges: asymmetric conflict, the presence of civilians, the speed of information, cyber warfare.
That emphasizing flexibility, technology, cooperation.
And critically, that stated adherence to moral and legal frameworks.
Which, of course, raises that important question we touched on earlier, the potential tension between these stated strategic principles.
And the messy reality of operations on the ground, especially concerning civilians.
Yeah, which we see reflected quite starkly in some of the other sources we looked at.
Indeed.
And that brings us directly to those reports, the ones detailing the impact of conflict, drawing particularly from sources discussing operations in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. This is really where the operational blueprints and the strategic frameworks collide with lived experience.
It is. And the sources, including reports from UN agencies like OCA and UNRWA, they paint an extremely grim picture, especially the humanitarian situation since October 2023.
Apocalyptic was one characterization mentioned.
Yes. Basic necessities, safe water, electricity, enough food aid reported as severely lacking.
The reports also mention widespread infectious diseases spreading in shelters.
That's right. Things like respiratory infections, meningitis, chickenpox,
Yeah.
and specific health impacts too, like malnutrition and anemia, particularly noted in pregnant women.
And among women and girls generally, issues like reproductive and urinary tract infections due to just lack of basic hygiene access.
Yes, that's reported. And then there's the sheer scale of physical destruction.
What do the sources say about that?
Sources like UNOSIT, using satellite analysis, estimate just vast numbers of damaged or destroyed structures, entire neighborhoods flattened in some areas.
Homes, businesses.
Hospitals, schools, universities, agricultural land. Particularly concentrated, the reports say, in the Gaza and Khan Yunis governorates.
Forced evacuations are also a major theme in these reports.
A very major theme. International organizations have voiced significant criticism about how these were carried out, questioning their safety, their feasibility.
Reporting that evacuation routes were often unsafe or blocked.
Yes, or impacted by ongoing military activity. And crucially, the reports state that the vast numbers of displaced people have generally not been able to return home safely.
Now, we need to discuss the findings from the Commission of Inquiry source. It's really important here to be clear.
Absolutely. We're relaying the findings and claims as presented in the source material. This isn't an endorsement, just reporting what the Commission stated it found.
Okay, so what did the Commission report regarding actions by Palestinian armed groups?
They reported finding reasonable grounds to believe that Palestinian armed groups allegedly committed war crimes. These included intentionally directing attacks against civilians, murder or willful killing, torture, inhuman or cruel treatment, destroying or seizing property, outrages upon personal dignity, and taking hostages, including children.
And regarding Israeli operations, what were the Commission's findings there?
The commission reported finding reasonable grounds to believe Israeli authorities were allegedly responsible for numerous war crimes, such as starvation as a method of warfare, murder or willful killing, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, forcible transfer, sexual violence, torture and inhuman or cruel treatment, arbitrary detention, and outrages upon personal dignity.
And the commission went further, didn't it? Regarding crimes against humanity.
Yes. The commission concluded, again based on reasonable grounds, that Israel had reportedly committed crimes against humanity. Specifically cited were extermination and gender persecution targeting Palestinian men and boys.
The sources also touch on specific incidents, sometimes with differing accounts, like strikes on aid convoys.
Right. There's a reported incident on Harun al-Rashid Street. The ISF, the Israeli Security Forces, reportedly stated they fired at individuals perceived as a threat during what they called looting of aid trucks.
But the commission had a different view.
The commission stated its review of drone footage showed mostly motionless figures, raising questions about that account.
There are also reports about aid workers being killed, like from World Central Kitchen.
Yes, WCK. And damage or destruction of hospitals, like the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital. The sources also note ISF orders for hospitals in northern Gaza to be evacuated early on.
And the ISF justification regarding civilian buildings.
The sources include the ISF claim that Hamas uses civilian buildings, which, in their view, makes them legitimate military targets.
Though the commission raises concerns there, too.
The commission notes concerns about the potentially disproportionate nature of the resulting widespread destruction, even if targets were present.
The use of specific munitions is also mentioned. Bunker busters.
Yes, reportedly used to target tunnels, but with concerns raised in the sources about the scale of the civilian casualties and destruction on the surface that resulted.
And the International Court of Justice, the ICJ.
The sources note the ICJ ordered Israel in May 2024 to halt its military offensive in Rafah, specifically citing the disastrous humanitarian situation it would create for civilians sheltering there.
The impact on children seems particularly devastating in these reports.
Consistently highlighted, children are half the population in Gaza. Reports mention lifelong trauma from the blockade even before this escalation, and now an unprecedented casualty rate.
Loss of education, thousands unaccompanied or separated.
Mental harm, obviously. And even specific reports of potential direct gunshot wounds in children that are reportedly being investigated.
And women and girls facing specific issues.
Gender-specific violence is mentioned, challenges during evacuations, reports of being searched, harassed, threatened, and those specific health crises we mentioned due to lack of hygiene access.
The treatment of detainees is another area covered.
Yes, disturbing reports there too. Allegations of sexual violence, torture, cruel or inhuman treatment.
It's something about filming.
The commission specifically found that filming confessions apparently obtained under duress and then releasing them publicly reportedly amounted to the war crime of outrages upon personal dignity.
And other filming incidents.
There were also reports cited of soldiers filming themselves humiliating or mocking Palestinian women during searches. The commission concluded this was reportedly intended to humiliate, punish, and intimidate the civilian population broadly.
Shifting focus slightly, but related to the West Bank. What do the sources say happened there after October 7th?
A significant surge reported in settler attacks against Palestinian communities.
What kind of attacks?
Threats leave or be harmed or killed, destruction of property, water tanks, solar panels, olive trees, harm to livestock, beatings, sometimes reportedly involving live ammunition, arbitrary arrests and detentions.
Often with ISF presence reported nearby.
Yes, that's often noted in the reports. Alongside this, a reported increase in land seizure by settlers and state approvals for thousands of new settlement homes.
Finally, the sources mentioned statements attributed to various officials.
Yes, examples cited include statements from some Israeli officials reportedly suggesting punishment of the entire population or encouraging migration or deportation of Gazans.
Though others push back.
Right. Other officials, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, are reported as publicly dismissing proposals for permanent occupation or displacement.
Looking at all these reports together, it's the sheer scale and the detailed nature of the alleged violations and the human cost that really stands out.
It really does. It provides such a stark picture of the on-the-ground reality, a powerful counterpoint to the more procedural language of military manuals or the strategic goals outlined in doctrine.
It highlights that gap we keep mentioning between stated intent or policy, and the reported reality of operations and their consequences.
Absolutely. It underscores the immense human cost when these conflicts unfold in densely populated areas.
So let's broaden our view one last time. How do these events, centered in one region, ripple outwards? How do they affect geopolitics, regional stability, and even, perhaps surprisingly, threats much further afield, like in the U.S.?
The sources definitely show these connections. The conflict in Gaza is explicitly linked to actions by other regional players.
Like the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea.
Exactly, and clashes involving Iran, Syria, Lebanon, it's not happening in isolation. And Israel's stated intention, mentioned in sources, to potentially keep troops indefinitely in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria also reflects this wider regional dynamic.
We also saw political discussions reported about the potential future of Gazans themselves, relocation or displacement ideas.
Yes, various reports surfaced mentioning discussions or suggestions, some attributed to U.S. figures about potential U.S. control or displacement, reports that Arab leaders proposed reconstruction plans that were apparently rejected,
And specific countries mentioned as potential destinations.
reports mentioned the U.S. and Israel potentially looking at countries in Africa, like Morocco or Somalia, or perhaps Syria or Libya. Though it's crucial to note that some of the countries named to Kolob reportedly denied any such discussions were happening.
And back in the West Bank, that reported surge in settlement activity and land seizures continues as part of this broader picture.
It's presented as an ongoing factor in the regional and political landscape within the source material.
Okay, now the connection to the U.S. homeland, this is eye-opening. How does a conflict like this potentially impact threats here?
Well, one key source, a U.S. threat assessment, directly links the Hamas attack and the subsequent Israeli operations in Gaza to an increase in calls from certain groups.
Which groups?
Groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda, they're reportedly using the conflict to call for lone offender attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure.
What kind of targets?
Government buildings, foreign embassies, transportation systems, civil aviation, basically high visibility or essential service targets.
So, events overseas can directly inspire individuals here. The source also mentioned insiders.
Yes, concern about potential FTO-inspired insiders, that's foreign terrorist organization individuals who might already have access to critical infrastructure sectors because of their jobs, that's seen as a significant risk.
And it's not just those groups.
No. The assessment notes that violent actors with other motivations, including racially or ethnically motivated extremists, have also reportedly encouraged sabotage.
Against which sectors?
Energy infrastructure, communications networks, the healthcare sector. The source mentions some actual attacks on electric grid substations, though their impact was localized.
Drones are another concern mentioned.
Right. Unauthorized drone activity over sensitive, critical infrastructure sites. The intent isn't always clear. Could be reconnaissance, could be testing defenses, could be more sinister. But the potential for intelligence gathering, dropping small explosives, or just endangering airports is a noted concern.
And beyond physical threats, the cyber dimension remains huge.
Absolutely. The source points fingers here. The PRC, China, is identified as the biggest espionage threat, specifically targeting U.S. critical infrastructure, often by exploiting known software vulnerabilities.
Russia.
Also a major player, targeting government and private networks with a particular focus on compromising software supply chains, a way to gain widespread access.
And North Korea.
Mentioned for deploying highly skilled IT workers globally, often under false identities, to infiltrate U.S. systems. Their goal is often economic gain or stealing military technology.
It's quite a landscape of threats. And then, amidst all this high-level strategy and threat analysis, we have that TikTok source.
Yeah, providing these incredibly personal, ground-level glimpses, it really brings the human dimension into sharp focus.
You see the trauma of bombings, the loss of homes, the difficult return to destroyed places like the Jenin refugee camp.
But you also see these moments of resilience, of shared humanity, like that story of the American visitor who identified as having Jewish heritage being welcomed into a Palestinian refugee home in Cairo.
Offered tea and snacks, trusted to hold a baby.
Exactly. These individual stories, they connect directly back to those larger historical narratives of displacement, like the Nakba, offering a human counterpoint to the geopolitical chessboard.
What's really fascinating pulling this section together is seeing that chain reaction laid bare in the sources.
How a conflict in one region triggers responses thousands of miles away.
International political maneuvering, shifts in military posture across borders, influencing the rhetoric of extremist groups online.
And even factoring into threat assessments for critical infrastructure in places like the U.S.
It really hammers home just how interconnected global security is, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows that what happens in one corner of the world can have these profound, sometimes really unexpected consequences on so many different levels, from international relations right down to individual lives and the systems we rely on every day.
So we've journeyed through quite a stack of sources in this deep dive. We started right down in the weeds with that incredibly detailed, almost clinical process of military site exploitation.
Yeah, down to the soil samples and photo logs. Then we zoomed out to the higher level strategic thinking, looking at how Israel's national security doctrine is described as evolving.
Trying to balance traditional military aims with modern complexities like asymmetric warfare, the role of civilians, technology.
While also emphasizing that stated commitment to moral and legal frameworks, alongside cooperation and proactive measures.
And then we confronted the raw reality on the ground, drawing from those reports, detailing the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the immense destruction, the displacement.
And impartially presenting those detailed findings from the Commission of Inquiry regarding alleged violations by various parties involved.
Finally, we pulled the lens back even further, connecting these events to the wider region, the reported international political discussions, the situation in the West Bank.
And those sometimes surprising links to homeland security concerns and global cyber threats.
What really emerges, I think, from looking at all these diverse sources together is that any single conflict isn't just one thing. It's this incredibly complex, layered web.
Yeah, a web of military action, strategic calculations, international law, humanitarian crisis, geopolitical maneuvering, deep-seated historical narratives.
And fundamentally, countless individual human experiences.
It's rarely simple, and the connections often run much deeper and wider than you might initially assume.
So thinking about all this, how does examining these different facets side by side, the meticulous planning in a manual, the evolving strategy, the stark findings of international bodies, the personal stories, how does that challenge or maybe deepen your understanding of how conflict actually unfolds and the true extent of its impact on our world?
It's certainly a lot to consider.